All right, welcome everyone. We thank you for joining us today. We have hiring, managing, and developing talent in a small business. We have two fantastic mentors from the SCORE Boston chapter that have a lot of experience in this area, and they have a lot of material to share with you today. But as we get started, and I'm sure a few more people are going to be jumping on, I'm going to kind of review and tell you a little bit about SCORE. There's a couple important things that SCORE does. One of those things is providing information for clients. You can find a lot of that information on our website. There are all kinds of templates you can download, blogs you could read, videos you can watch, lots of great information. Another important thing that SCORE does is training. Our training comes in the form of workshops and webinars. You probably know about those since you're here today, and I strongly encourage you to watch the newsletter or check out the website for the offerings. We have a lot of really great topics that we're trying to squeeze in before the holidays. So strongly encourage you to take a look at all of those offerings. The most important thing that SCORE does, however, is it's one-on-one mentoring. And our mentors are volunteers that come to us with a wide variety of experience and background that they want to share with the small business community. And we're working with those that are trying to decide if small business is right for them. We're working with those that are in that planning phase, and we're working with those that are already in business. Folks come to us for a wide range of reasons. And if we don't have somebody in our chapter, we'll reach out to the district or the national level to find someone that can help you. A first session is going to be finding out what your goals and challenges are. And that mentor is going to work towards making a plan for you to overcome those challenges and meet those goals. They work as a team. They will bring in other mentors to assist. They will reach out to fellow mentors to help fill in blanks that they might not have knowledge on. So it's a team effort, which is a great way to work and volunteer and help others. Getting a mentor is very easy. Just go to the score.org website. There's a little blue box that asks for your zip code. Put your zip code in. It'll match you to the chapter that's nearest you. And then that chapter will use the information that you provide to find the mentor that can at least at the start working with you and assist you the best. So I strongly encourage you to go to the score.org website and look for that blue box and put your zip code in there to get matched to a mentor. We are recording today, and this recording will be available for you to watch again in the future. Give me about 24 to 48 hours to get it posted on the website. It'll be on the score.org/Boston website, local workshop tab, and then under there you will find previously recorded. I will put that in the chat a little later in the program so that you can remember where to find it. We do intend on interacting with you through chat, which is great. But because we have a nice number of people, if you have a very specific question for our presenters today, it is helpful if you put it into the Q&A button, just so I don't lose track of it because of all the interaction in chat. Sometimes questions can get lost. So if you have a question for our presenters today, please put it into that Q&A button, and we'll get that question read out and get you an answer the best we can. So I'm done. I'm going to turn it over to Steve, and I'll let you introduce yourself.
Good morning, good afternoon, wherever you are. This is Steve Bookbinder. I'm Steve Bookbinder, and this is Carrie Morrill. We are the leaders of this webinar today. Both of us have extensive experience, both in, company jobs as HR professionals and as consultants. So we're glad to be here. We really look forward to interaction with you. It is a little awkward when you have a webinar that you have to use the chat. We're going to want you to use the chat because we want this to be as interactive as we can. If you can type into the chat your comments when we ask questions, then Teresa can read them back and Carrie and I can respond. So this webinar is about basically people management. That is to say, hiring, managing, and developing talent in your small businesses. Now, people have been talking about these subjects for 3,000 years. It's hard to believe, but people have always talked about how do you develop and, how do you create whatever it is, a better person, a better worker. In fact, there's an ancient Chinese sort of book called The Art of War by Sun Tzu, where he talks about if you want a soldier, you have to understand what the motivations, you want a good soldier, you have to understand what the motivations of a good soldier are, and how to motivate people. And that's a lot about what people management is about. So our expectations today are that we're going to think about something called talent management. One of the questions we have is, why are people using that term more often? Why do people use the term talent more than other terms these days? Does anybody have a reaction to that? Who wants to type that into the chat? And again, we have this pause while someone types. Any responses so far? Teresa?
To highlight skill set.
To highlight a skill set, okay. Not just talk about those people as a resource, but to highlight the skill set. A really interesting response. Who else has an idea of why do we use the word talent versus personnel or human resources or something like that?
I have several I'm going to read out. It's about the whole TM life cycle. Talent is an innate ability. It's positive. That people are individual assets. You can't make a donkey into a racehorse. Focuses on strength, and everyone has talent.
And everyone has some talent. Very interesting. So we're going to talk about, okay, what's a talent plan? We live in a time of uncertainty. Let's face it. The number of times we've been predicted that we're going to have a recession. A year ago, people were getting bonuses. And there was a terrible rush to find talent. Today, there's not a terrible rush to find talent. We went from what could be called a seller's market, that's the person sort of selling their skills, to a buyer's market. The employer now has the upper hand. Things are changing all the time. We're going to talk about hiring, and Carrie in particular is going to talk about the legal issues and all the issues of onboarding and how do you reward people? What's the quote deal? That is to say, the total rewards of working in a place, which is not just the pay and benefits. We're going to talk about performance, and we're going to talk about some other issues. Now, before we proceed, I'd love you to use the chat again and tell us really briefly, what brings you here today? What's your hot topic of the day that you'd like Carrie and I to sort of cover and address? And I assume your fingers are going to move fast. Teresa, any comments so far? Teresa, some of the stuff in the chat?
Oh, sorry. My thing didn't unmute. Yeah, everyone, legal concerns with hiring new employees as we expand, working on hiring my first employee, managing remote employees, hiring first employee, thinking of my first W-2 hire and want to understand the logistics behind that. Launching a nonprofit and don't know what I don't know, and going from solopreneur, hopefully hiring a team in January, also hiring first employee, legal issues. I'm hiring next year. We are scaling. Yeah, a lot of new people, a first time hiring. How to pay workers who get supplement checks from the state. First employee, first time employee. Yeah.
Taking over as a general manager. And all the different kinds of thoughts about that, what it is to manage. Anything else? Enough pay. These are all the issues. How to pay workers. That's always a big issue. Hiring new employees. What's a new employee versus a contractor? we're going to address part of that as well. So anything else that people have as thoughts of what they're looking for? What brought you here today? Anything else? That'd be great.
Yeah, I think I read through quite a few.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, to start, when you're hiring an employee, whether you're hiring one or you're hiring 10, you need to think about, okay, what's my business? What's my marketing strategy? And what are the talent implications of that? If I'm trying to operate the business and create new products, I don't have time to sell. So if I want to grow this business, I have to hire somebody who can do new business development or maybe sell. What's the right number of people you need to sort of make your business happen? These are the 6 steps that everybody goes through and should go through. Whether you're hiring your first employee or you're hiring the next 100, you've got to think about the right number of people. Recently, I was working with a not-for-profit, which really has the owner has been the sole source of everything. He's the scarcest resource. And he knows now that he needs someone he calls a program manager or a site director to sort of administer all the programs that he's developed. And yet, he doesn't have the money necessarily to hire both a program director and a site director. So how does one look at that question? What are the competencies you need? If you're going to hire a program manager versus someone who runs the not-for-profit, what do you need? If you're going to hire a salesperson, what does that person have to be able to do? What are the competencies that person really needs? And we're going to talk about the next step, because in order to determine competencies, you need to think about a job description. You have to know, you can't just say, well, you know, I'm running this not-for-profit. It's great. I've got all these programs and I need a program manager. Nobody knows what that means. I need a site director. No, you have to sort of say and develop a job description that fits your business and really describes the competencies. Then you've got to think about, can I afford this? Who, you know, can you afford to pay them? What's the market for them? And that's always a tough question. Whether you're in a big company or a small company, what's the right level of pay in the marketplace, and what's going to be fair to the other employees you have? One concept is called market competitiveness. The other concept is called equity or pay equity within the company. Because you can't just decide, I'm paying one person this, and you know, I really need this additional person, and I'm going to pay her 20% more. You've got to think about all of that. And what's the timing of when you can put this talent into place? Can I hire now? Can I hire in 6 months? Can I hire in a year? When will I have enough revenue to cover the costs of these employees? And whether you have 2,000 employees or you have 2 employees, you're always thinking about the timing of when to bring people on. And then you think about the talent management programs, onboarding, training, pay, workforce policies, what you're actually going to do. But sometimes people make the mistake that they come to us and they say, hey, I need a training program, or I need to know what to pay this woman or this man. And they're putting the cart before the horse. You've got to actually go through these 5 steps, and it doesn't take that long in order to think correctly about what's needed. Okay, so now I want to go to the next slide, and I want Carrie to sort of start off talking to us about a job description, what it is to be job related, what it is to hire, what it is to manage performance. Carrie.
So once you've decided you might need some people.
Can you speak up just a little bit, Carrie?
Yeah, can you hear me now?
Yeah, a little louder.
All right, I'm screaming, so
Okay.
let me know if you can't hear me. Once you've decided you need to hire someone, once you've gotten that far down the road, you've figured out what this person is going to do, the title, what you want to pay them, you have to think about how are you going to get them on board. So there are a number of ways. Some people post jobs on their website. Some people go to Indeed or LinkedIn and put the job postings there. Usually the best option is to have a multi-pronged approach. And if you think you're not good at doing this, there are always agencies that you can hire who will send you candidates, and you pay them only if they make a hire. That said, you've got to tell them what this person is going to do, what are the skill sets they need, whether hard skills or soft. You need to put something together that describes the company. You know, what makes this an exciting company? What are they going to be doing on a job? And what are the skills they're going to bring with them? And you use that both as a posting and also as something you can give to individual candidates. So what you need depends on the company and the position. So if you're looking for one in sales, so you want who's done, who to find new clients, who knows how to close you. You probably want to know that they've done a certain amount of selling and who you might say, I want someone with sales background in the life sciences industry. You need to sell the company when for them is what's in it for me. And so that has to be apparent in the way you sell the company. And you need to think about, why do the people, what would make someone want to come to your company? What's the culture like? Will they be a part of structuring the culture if they're your first employee? So you need to sit down and really do some soul searching on what's it going to be like to work there. What might motivate someone? And this is especially important if it's your first hire. If you have 10 or 15 or even, more people, you can actually have a session and ask them, what do they like about working here? Why do they stay? And that can be sort of put into your, what's in it for me. So you've found a couple of candidates who look good. You have to sell the company, but as important as selling the company, you need to assess and evaluate the potential hire to make certain they really are bringing the skill sets that you need, hard and soft. And, sometimes it's a gut feel. Are they going to fit what you need them to do? How are you going to motivate them? And this should come out of the face-to-face interview, because you can talk to them about previous work history. What did they like about what kind of that will in thinking through, is this a good match for your business, just because of the way you operate. So you've hired your first employee, or your 10th or your 20th. How are you going to manage them? We talked a lot in the past about performance management, and we talked about accountability. And typically what happened is a set of goals. My audio's cutting in and out.
Yeah.
Yeah, maybe can you just turn your video off, leave your audio on? That way we're not pulling as much bandwidth. Maybe that'll help.
Sure.
Yeah.
Let's try it. There's work being done here, and I think that's part of the problem. I'll stop my
Yeah.
video. Can you
Okay.
hear me?
Yeah,
Better?
that is better. Yep.
All right. So we're talking about managing performance. And it used to be that you sat down with your employees once a year, you set goals, and then at the end of the year, you gave them an evaluation of how they did. That was called the accountability approach. It's changed quite a bit over the last 8, 9, 10 years to be much more about creating an environment that sets goals where you meet with the candidates the individuals, your employees, on an ongoing basis to sort of discuss, how are they doing? has something changed? It should be something that isn't static, because business needs change. So you want to make sure that you're meeting with the employee, seeing how they're doing against their objectives, deciding together whether you need to tweak those objectives. And really what's important is that it's an open exchange where they can say, I could use this help from you. And you can say, let's talk about how we're going to get from A to B. Additionally, I think it's really about, they want to grow on the job. So a key element of managing their performance is to help them move their skill sets forward. That will help not only your employees, it will drive their engagement, but it also will be helpful to the business, because an engaged employee is a much more productive employee. And you want someone who joins and says, what a great place to work. I'm here for a while. Does anyone have any questions or things that they would like me to address about performance management? You know, you could talk about it
And I
for,
also want to go back to Carrie's earlier points about hiring, about a job description, about the need to sell the potential hire. Several of you mentioned that you want to hire people. What are you worried about? What concerns you as you think about hiring a person, or as you think about managing their performance? Let's take a second and have you put that in the chat. What are your concerns about hiring? Is it hard? Can you do a job description that addresses soft skills and hard skills? Why should you sell the potential hire? All of those comments. Let's get some comments from you guys, you folks.
I am getting some comments about handling remote workers, and I don't know if that's something we want to get into at this point.
Yeah, that's fine.
But I do have somebody else that's asking about federal and state laws.
Well, we're going to
Yeah,
talk about that in the next slide, so we'll address that. But
Okay.
what about remote? What's the question about remote people?
Well, managing the performance of remote employees and creating a good work culture when they're not together, or when they're
Okay.
not in the office.
That's a very hot topic. Carrie, you want to
Yeah.
comment on it? And then I can too.
you know, I think that one of the things that's really important is to use technology to make them feel as though they're part of the organization. Things are so much better with with any sort of video chats rather than using the phone. But you need to find to make them feel as though they're part of the business, because working remotely, you can really feel isolated. So any sort of, we used at a couple of the companies that I was at, we sometimes would bring them into the closest office. If your remote employees are local, you can have day office. We did, we gamified things so that they felt that they were working with others. We did cross department teams of remote employees so that they had to work together and get to know each other. I'm sure you've done other things too that that might be equally as important in building a sense of community, because that's really what you're doing with them. You want them to feel as though they're part of something.
I think that what Carrie just said, addresses this very important question. It's not a sidebar. What people learned during the pandemic is that many people liked working remotely. They didn't necessarily like working 5 days a week remotely, but they sure liked working 2 days a week remotely. And that interest continues. Most of the research on workers shows that interest strongly, and that's an attractive factor for me to come to work for you.
Yes.
If I can spend, that's what employees are asking in the interview. Can I spend some time working remotely? Obviously, you can't, if you're running a restaurant, you can't work remotely. So therefore, you have to think about other things that will motivate a person, because a restaurant worker can't work remotely. But there are lots of businesses, and it means that you've got to be creative about your business if somebody asks to work remotely. But what Carrie just mentioned about the need to bring people together, even electronically, however you can do it, lunches remotely. That's what a lot of organizations do. So everybody gets on this screen, and it's imperfect, but you can have a small group discussion where everybody's on. I think the other important thing that goes back to what Carrie talked about is, notice what we put in bold. Give the individual objective, motivating, and thoughtful feedback on an ongoing basis. One of the things that happened during the pandemic is, since people were working remotely, they just assumed that they didn't need a lot of feedback. And there's evidence to show that in the research. And unfortunately, that's completely untrue. If I'm working remotely, I need just as much, if not more, feedback on what I'm doing. And so the points that we hit at there are important. But remember, the job description includes soft skills and hard skills. It doesn't necessarily address the issue of remote work, which is something the individual wants. Now, again, depending on your company, not in a restaurant, because it doesn't work that way, but in other businesses, you may find the capacity for that. Now, on the next slides, we're going to get into some of your questions about, non-competes and, exempt and non-exempt. But on this slide, I want to make sure that we understand all the issues around hiring. How many people, for example, are some of you having a tough time hiring? What are the issues for you in hiring? Maybe we'll get a few more quotes on that.
Yeah, I have one. This person's wondering about, do you hire the more expensive person at the higher, or the more experienced person at the higher salary, or do you hire a more junior person that you need to train?
Take it away, Carrie.
That's a very, I would say that really goes to how much time do you have to spend developing the person. One of the laws in Massachusetts and in many other states, you no longer can ask an individual what they're making currently. That law was put in place to protect women and minorities who typically were making less. So you can say, what do you want? But you can't ask them what they're currently making. A lot of companies are just posting the salaries. So let's say you have done all the work that Steve talked about earlier, and you've looked at your financials and you said, I can afford this. And if you feel you'd be more comfortable because it's not an area of strength for you personally, and it's someone, maybe your first or second employee, so you really need to balance out the skill sets of the people. You might say, for me, that person, it's worth getting the more experienced person because I'll have to spend less time in the training and development. But I can speak from experience that I've often hired people who are younger, well, we won't use the term young, new to that space. Fast track, really driven to succeed, but they need a lot of training because they're new to the workplace sometimes, or new to the space. And I've had the ability and time to train them. So there is no right answer there. It's really a matter of, do you have the ability to pay that more expensive person? Do you have the time to train a less experienced person? And what really is what you want? Do you want to? Do you want them to do it your way?
That's goes back to, as Carrie just mentioned, this first slide. Who do you need? Now, people will say, I want to hire the less experienced person, but it may take some real training time to get that person up to speed. You may not be able to afford the more experienced person. So you need to go through this talent plan to
Mhm.
understand exactly what it is you can do. We're going to move along because there's so much to say. I want to respond to one comment that's in the chat. I find it hard to hire employees for a reasonable pay rate. All the candidates want more as a starting rate than ever before. Can I say, if you look at employee opinion research over 30 years, you'll find out that you cannot ask the question, do you feel that you're paid enough? Okay. Most people over the years have always thought that they should be paid more. What the pandemic did was it created an inflation, obviously, of products and goods, which got reflected, obviously, in wage increases. And people, in real terms, their wages had been held down. So the reality is that after the pandemic, people have, initially after the pandemic in 2022, people started asking for more wages and they were getting more wages. Now, all of a sudden, inflation is coming down. So the company is in a better position. That doesn't mean that people are not looking for higher starting rates. And they are looking for higher starting rates because of what they heard in 2022. That's what I mean about the world that you're living in is an uncertain world. We went from a world where wages were going up dramatically to a world where wages are now being stabilized. And the employees have not caught up with that. So you in the discussion, if you go back to what Carrie was saying, you in the discussion have to sell your employee on why she or he should come to work for you for this rate. You have to do that more than you had to do it before. But thanks to Robin for her question on this. The ability to be able to consistently pay hires to keep cash flows stable while still growing the business, very good comment. That's exactly what you have to do. That's why you need the talent plan. You've got to actually think about what your business strategy is, which relates to cash flow, and whether you can afford things. And people don't do that. They say, oh, I need to hire somebody. And they don't start at the beginning, which is what this question from Grayson sort of mentions. We've talked about.
So could I comment on that?
Could go on to the employee handbook if you could.
Well, I'd like to just comment on that
Yeah.
thing because people worry when they're hiring that they can't afford to compete in the market. And when you think about total rewards, which is how you have to think about what you give the employee now, compensation is only one piece of it. Not if you do a poll, what's important to you. Compensation often doesn't come out first. You can do benefit, life balance, employee recognition programs, and career development is very important. And if benefits are challenging, there's lots of other options there, work from home opportunities, flexible work schedules. So you need to think about it creatively. And
excellent. And I just want to say these comments from you folks in the audience, even though we're doing this remotely, are really helpful and they focus our conversation. Can we go on to employee handbook, Carrie,
Yep.
just aware of time?
Sure. So the compliance, is he saying an employee value proposition?
No, well, just the idea of why you need a handbook.
All right. So a handbook is required by Massachusetts law. It's compliance, and it doesn't matter whether you have one employee or 10,000 employees. The Commonwealth of Massachusetts requires you to have an employee handbook. You might ask the question, why do I need an employee handbook? And on a very basic level, it protects you, the company, against discrimination and favoritism claims. There are certain requirements that Massachusetts has for you to put in your employee handbook. You need to look, it's all on mass.gov, but it's things like attendance, harassment, paid leave, termination, and employee at will status. There are also requirements that are federal that you need to comply with. You need to comply with both. And one thing that's very critical, you do want to comply with these, because if you ever were taken to court by an employee or by the government, the fines are very, very steep. So
So-
you want to be,
Yeah, and just to reiterate that, mass.gov, you can find an employee handbook, you can find samples, you can just go on the internet and find samples of handbooks, and then you have to adapt it for yourself. There's a new development out there, which is these kind of automated payroll systems which claim that they can function as your people manager. One of them is called Bambi, which has bought up an enormous amount of radio time. I can't believe the name of it. But, you know, they come on and they say, well, what if your employee, you know, comes in and smells? What can you do about that? You need Bambi for $99 a month to tell you what to do about that. Well, in fact, your handbook lays out what are the requirements for coming to work. Or the next Bambi ad says, you know, what if there's an harassment claim? Well, you should have in your handbook what are the issues that govern harassment as well. So just to mention that, along with the job description, along with thinking through your hiring strategy, along with giving important feedback to whether people are remote or on site, is the notion of this handbook. There are a lot of questions about laws. So Carrie, I want to move to this and
okay,
let's go on.
certainly.
hiring
One thing I
requirements
would
day one.
say is you should have, you know, the handbook requirements change year to year. It's beneficial to have a lawyer take a quick look at them to make sure your language is compliant, and they will tell you, treat everyone the same.
Okay. Let's go on to the laws that people have asked questions about. And
Okay,
again,
which ones?
What questions you have in the chat, folks? So Carrie?
Yep. I don't, are there any specific questions?
Not yet. So
All
There
right,
were-
so, you know, there are laws, I-9 as an example. I-9 lets the federal government, and you know that the person you're hiring is who he or she says they are. They have to show you there are choices. And it also tells the right to work in the US. You cannot tell your employees what you want to see as proof. You direct them to the I-9 form and there'll be choices, options, but there will be something that makes certain they're compliant with the law. I see a question, which I'm going to get to in a minute, about non-competes.
yeah, we'll get to there. It's the bottom. Yeah.
So, you know, there are hiring issues from day one. You need to tell them about the benefits and all of the legal requirements, have them fill out the paperwork. You have 10 days to let the Commonwealth of Massachusetts know about the hire. You only have 3 days to turn in your I-9 to the federal government. You need to classify your workers. If they are employees, it's exempt or non-exempt. Exempt means they don't get overtime. There are very specific laws covering who's an exempt and who's a non-exempt. A lot of small businesses want to make everybody exempt because then you don't have to pay them overtime, but that can get you into trouble if there's an audit ever. There are very specific rules around exempt versus non-exempt is paid a regular salary. They cannot be paid minimum wage to be higher. The cutoff is if they're under 35,568,000 in total compensation, they're considered non-exempt.
And also the employee versus the independent contractor, which is
Yeah,
really
I'm going to come back because this one is very important to classify them right. Usually there's to be exempt, you need to be able to exercise independent judgment. So sometimes an administrative assistant, if they're given the opportunity to make decisions without their boss's input, could be exempt. Most of the time, if they're hourly, they're almost always non-exempt. So it's important. These laws are the same for part-time as well. It's got nothing to do with part-time. It's got nothing to do with white collar versus blue collar, what you wear to work. It's get on mass.gov. It will show you exactly how you classify each and classify them right. So then there's the issue of employee versus independent contractor. If you talk to most employment lawyers, they would tell you that almost everybody is an employee. There's a 3-part rule in Massachusetts, a test that will help you know if the person should be an employee or a contractor. If they are doing the work under your direction and you control what they do each day, that's test number 1. That's an employee, not a contractor. If it's done outside the usual course of employee business, so you're bringing a skill that isn't done day to day with the employee, and you have to meet a second requirement there. You have a business doing this. You offer this service to multiple clients. So this is all on mass.gov. These are the sorts of things where a lawyer is helpful for reviewing your classifications. But almost everyone, if you've got a gardening business and you hire students in the summer, and they're only summer workers, but they're doing exactly what your full-time workers do. They are not contractors. They are employees, and you hire them for the summer, and at the end of the summer, they're gone.
But they work directly under you, under supervision. And, we see people misclassify, for example, in a landscaping business, or even in a home health care business where people are directly under their control. We see this happening. I guess I would take, make sure you just go on mass.gov and look for what you just have to Google three-part classification, and it will help you to understand. Most of our clients probably in the end will not consult a lawyer. So you should just be familiar with these kinds of things. You can come to SCORE and speak to us about these kinds of things so that we understand them. Discrimination, again, Carrie, you want to comment on insurance compensation? What are the things that on day one you have to have in terms of workers' comp, et cetera?
You need to have disability insurance. You need to make sure you've signed up for unemployment insurance, and you need workers' comp. You should have liability insurance as well. Workman's comp, if you get sick, has an accident on the job, or gets sick because of a chemical that might be at a plant, they're covered by workman's comp. A lot of companies will use disability. You need disability. You don't have to have short-term. You might want to. You need to think about your workforce and what you do, but you need to have some sort of disability insurance to cover them.
And people forget this. Contracting companies, for example, or painting companies will think, oh, well, I'm hiring these people part-time and I don't have to give them workers' comp. Somebody falls off a ladder and doesn't have workers' comp and is actually an employee, not an independent contractor, and you will be in hot water. Again, a lot of these are logic things that you don't necessarily have to be a lawyer for. The issue is that many people are sort of uncomfortable doing these kinds of things. And whether you're comfortable or not, you've got to follow the law. Discipline and termination. I'm just aware of time, Carrie. Some thoughts on that, and confidentiality and non-compete and poaching and things.
So non-competes in Massachusetts, and actually the federal government's thinking about doing the same. Many, many states have made non-competes illegal. You can have a non-compete. If you have a non-compete and you decide to hold that employee who's leaving to it, you have to pay them for the period of the non-compete. So you really don't want to. The confidentiality, you can have them sign a non-disclosure. You can have a whole thing about what they can't share if they leave, and they shouldn't share it either while they're working for you. And then the poaching, that's perfectly acceptable. So you might want to put something in about non-solicitation of employees. And there are lots of, one of the things I'd like to come back to, the stuff on job descriptions, on almost everything we've talked about. There are resources that will provide you with templates. I mean, you can look and see it, competing companies, how are they posting their jobs? You know, what sorts of things do they think are interesting? With worker classification, there's a ton of resources out there. You can Google and find government and some other stuff that's been written. So there's a lot of resources you can use on your own. In terms of termination, the one thing I would say is if you have an employee who isn't performing, you would want to have several conversations. You don't just want to walk up and terminate, but you want to talk to them about their non-performance and put together a plan with them of what they need to do to bring their performance up to par. You need to make sure that every conversation, every email, any sort of interaction with them is you make sure that that's followed, that they have a copy, that you keep a copy. You want to have an audit trail of any conversations you've had. There are terminations that are done on the spot, and those are usually because they've done something that is either illegal or just you can't keep them. So those terminations, but we're all employees at will, which means we don't have contracts. We can be terminated, but you have to be careful that you do it in a way that you don't leave yourself open to any sort of, we're a litigious society sometimes, and there are lawyers, there are people who come after companies. So you want to make sure you've got everything.
Now,
tracked.
we're going to have, we can't cover all of the issues, essentially of that are on this page. And this is where we recommend you, if you have a specific question, that you come to SCORE, and we have
Yes.
lawyers, we have various people who can help on various kinds of things. But all of these issues are sort of connected. If you have a handbook, you will have a policy on discipline and
Yes.
termination. It should direct you. If you have a handbook, you can sort of say certain things. But someone asked, what about the fact that you're in the cleaning business and people go from, company to company, and, people poach people? That is actually the marketplace, fortunately or unfortunately. People can do that, and people will leave. The question, which we're going to get into, is why would I want to go to that other company unless I don't feel that my company is any better than the other company? So a few cents more in hourly wage, but what am I going to lose if I leave this company? The person should be asking that question too. Now, before we go on, any other questions? There's some very specific questions about, are all the laws the same for part-time versus full-time employees? That's a sort of a complicated question, because part-time employees, the issue is whether they are an employee or an independent contractor. And remember the example of the landscaping company, of other kinds of companies. They are employees in Massachusetts most frequently. So part of this is to raise the issues for you. And when you have a specific question, you can come to those. The whole
So
question.
one thing I'd just like to answer with that question is, typically with part-time employees, and we're talking employees now, not contractors, if they're under a certain amount of hours, and most companies make that 30, or if they're summer employees, you could say they don't get vacation, they don't get the benefits, they don't get days off, sick time, is mandated by the state, so you have to follow the sick time laws, again, on mass.gov, easy to find. But you don't have to offer them all the same things, but they have to be legally you have to treat them like the others if there's a disciplinary problem or anything with confidentiality, poaching, all of those.
That's where the same rules apply. But specifics, let us know. I want to move on a little bit to the next slide to sort of begin to sort of talk about some other issues. This is like a hairball, somebody said.
Yeah.
So confusing, jumping around. These slides should be broken down. Too much info on each. Well, this is a response to Linda, and I like these kind of objections. There is a lot of information here. It's to introduce you to things. You can watch this video again. Hopefully, it's not, we're following sort of the rule of saying, okay, there is a plan. There is the whole question of how you bring someone on. There are these laws. We can't cover everything. We do want to cover some other information because this is an intro for you. And we want to make sure that you're aware of the range of topics as you go to hire somebody. You do need information, innovation, and determination. Part of what we've been talking about, and now we get to the softer side, is that an employee needs faith in the future. Give them a reason to believe. Owners are more hesitant to hire now, and this is now in the data because they're worried about rising costs and wages. You've got to be creative about this stuff. There are many topics under the field of people management. This is an intro for you about what you need to do when you first hire, whether it's the classification or it's first of all thinking about the talent plan, then thinking about the classification issues, job description. But you need to be creative and you need to be resilient so that employees become committed to your business. They won't, we introduced the topic of poaching. They won't leave if they're committed to your business. And you need to be a talent magnet. A lot of what's important, even in these laws, is that you walk the talk. And a payroll system, sometimes people look for tracking data, but don't delegate, as I mentioned earlier, the example of Bambi, don't delegate management to the system. Again, I really appreciate the comments in the chat, and please give us more. What are the questions you have? To be a leader today, and we only have about 7 or 8 more minutes, you have to understand you're the scarcest resource, and you need to take care of yourself. You need checklists. You need counselors. You need people who we call canaries. Those are people who can tell you, like the canary in the coal mine, what's going on. You need to be the leader who stays strong without losing, the connection to your workforce. You got to walk in your employees' shoes. What do they need to understand about these laws? What do they need to understand about their performance? What do they need to understand about working remotely? And still forge ahead. That's the key to talent management. You've got to always breathe new life into an organization. So one of the things we want to talk about is you as the leader, without employees becoming change weary. More than ever, you've got to listen. And this is a message about what is the process. And, your customers and employees may have the answers. And that's what's critical. There's another concept called the deal. In uncertain times, and Carrie sort of mentioned some of these issues, it's all the more important. What am I giving and what am I getting? Salaries, especially for lower paying, as we've mentioned, and mid-paying jobs, are going up. They are slowing down now, and benefits have been cut back, and their cost has gone up. So it's not easy, especially in a small business when you have one employee, to think about too many benefits. But we're going to talk about the concept that Carrie mentioned, which is total rewards. Part of this session is to leave you with the concepts that are critical. And again, we're covering a lot of stuff in 1 hour, and you can come back and see us, either Carrie or me or someone else who's expert on these issues. Employees are asking for more, which is one of the people, and their purchasing power has gone down, even if wages are up. So they're agitated in some ways about the deal. And there are no magic and bullets. People will say to me, how do you incentivize if I can't pay people more? Well, money, as Carrie mentioned, coming back to that, is not always the deciding factor in taking a job or for staying. If you're going to go to work in certain kinds of businesses like a restaurant where somebody offers you another $1 an hour, you'd better understand the culture of that restaurant, because the culture of the restaurant makes a great deal of difference, and that's been popularized in TV shows. So what are the total rewards? It's a job, but that's not enough. It's pay and benefits. It's working conditions. It's training and development. It's providing a supportive and flexible work environment. When somebody comes to you or calls you up and says, my kid is sick today and I'm going to be late, how flexible are you? How flexible can you be? It's a chance to grow with the company. In fact, even when there's 1 or 2 employees, you can sell people on the notion that we're going to grow. This is going to be a growing company. This is an opportunity for you. I can't pay you as much as the next restaurant, but once we get going, we're going to really expand. And you're selling the total rewards, the total deal. And that's how you convince a prospective employee about the value of your package and its relevance to them. You've got to be innovative. So first we started talking about the plan. Then we started talking about the basics of a job description and hiring someone. Then we talked about the issues of classification in the law, which many of you had questions about. And now we're talking about the issues of managing and developing. So as you move forward, effective talent management fundamentally means staying close to your employees. And actually, since the pandemic, the opposite has happened. People have shied away from anger and conflict, especially if an employee is not performing at a high level. They've gotten worried. They've been sympathetic, feeling sorry for their employees, but not really able to empathize, walk in their shoes. You as a manager, as you manage people, have to be thinking about the contingency plans when there's a crisis. You've got to be the leader who conveys the good news and the bad news. And you've got to be transparent about how the company's doing. And that's very hard sometimes for entrepreneurs. Lastly, in this time of uncertainty, you've got to be the leader that your employees and customers need, because you're the brand and the promise. Part of what is involved in managing and leading and developing is that you're the role model for employees. We talked about some of the hard stuff, the technical stuff. Now we're talking about the important stuff that's soft. A major paradox. You can't show panic, but you can't pretend that everything is the same. Be ready and don't overreact to the what ifs. The cost of goods, for example, is going up. Uncertainty is going to be with us for a while. And uncertainty is not just a reflection of only the economy. It can be the fact that people want to work remotely. It can be the fact that people are asking for much more in terms of work-life balance. Nurses, for example, quit in droves after the pandemic. Why? Because they just couldn't live that life anymore, no matter even if they were making $100,000. Uncertainty is here to stay, but we do believe you can chart a course for growth. You can hire people, you can provide opportunities for employees. What this session has been is an intro to all of that. We hope that when you look over the session after this, if you have specific questions, because we did move from topic to topic to topic, that you'll come back to us and give us an opportunity to work with you and think through the issues in more detail. On behalf of Carrie and me, I want to thank you. I want to thank you for all of your comments. If you can put your final comments in the chat, we would really appreciate it. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you for joining us. And as Steve mentioned, please go to the score.org website. You can get a mentor and we can answer your absolute specific questions and get into details there. And we'd be happy to continue the conversation that was started today. Yes, it is a lot of material. Absolutely. So definitely reach out to us so we can continue that conversation for you. All right. Thanks, Steve and Carrie. Thanks. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.
Carrie, you want to stay on?
Oh, you can't do that way.
Okay.
Sorry.
I'm on.
Carrie, I'll give you a call.